This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jespersen.
Have we milked supply management for too long? Ba-doops. Thank you very much. Our dad joke, we love it. We're very proud of as we get into an issue that may not be but it is in play. Supply management, how Canada basically handles certain segments of its ag industry, in particular dairy and poultry, as we, the Canadian delegation, negotiates with the United States and, of course, looks at trade opportunities around the world. Supply management has always been held up as a bit of a, here it comes, sacred cow. But some folks are calling for it to be abolished. You remember Maxime Bernier was calling for it a few years ago, but nobody really, generally en masse took it seriously, but more and more people are suggesting that it's time we re-examine Canada's approach to dairy, poultry, and other segments of the agriculture industry. Now, of course, it ruffles feathers. Pun absolutely intended. Why? Because producers, farmers are holding, in some cases, millions and millions of dollars worth of quota. We've seen this and discussed on the show before, supply management compared to, for example, the regulated taxi industry, which was obviously disrupted in a major way when ride sharing, when Uber and Lyft and other services started to pop up. Ultimately, devaluing those taxi licenses. In our home city, we heard that those taxi licenses were selling for upwards of $300,000 a piece. Can you imagine? You invested in those, your family's financial security tied up in those, and then all of a sudden, poof, the entire industry changes. Now, a fear of disruption is never really the reason to resist examining better ways of doing things, and so on this episode of the show, that's exactly where we'll go. In just a moment, a former colleague of mine, a longtime terrestrial AM radio talk show host and newspaper columnist who's just launched his own show, Rob Breakenridge, is going to hang out with us, and we're also going to bring in my cousin, a fifth-generation dairy farmer, my cousin Graham. All of that coming up in just 30 seconds. Before we get there, I want you to know that this episode of Real Talk is happening with the support of We Know Training. You can see them online at wkt.ca. If you're the one in charge of training or certification in your industry, your organization, you probably already know about We Know Training. If not, make sure you check them out online. Again, that's wkt.ca. Not just another training software company. We Know Training partners with governments, regulators, and businesses across Canada to manage entire credentialing programs. Think of it as plug-and-play training that's built for trust, compliance, and real-world impact. They don't just build learning platforms, they're helping people and organizations level up. And in industries where compliance is critical, that makes all the difference. You can check them out online today at wkt.ca. We may have seen this story in the Calgary Herald just a couple of days ago. Supply management ignored for sexier political battles. The author of that, a longtime political commentator and a good friend of this show, Rob Breakenridge, who joins us alongside my cousin, Graham Jespersen, who is the straw that stirs the milk at Glory View Farms. Fellas, it's great to see both of you here. Looking forward to an informed conversation. Please feel free to interrupt one another and speak freely. Rob, we'll start with you. What prompted your foray into supply management? Not the sexiest subject matter, but it's a big one.
Well, there's a couple of issues going on here. First of all, and I think it's something that Canadians should be paying attention to because it's back, that being the Bloc Québécois attempts to officially shield supply management from ever being on the table in any future trade talks. And we've seen where Canada and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, in the CUSMA agreement, we made some small minor carve-outs where we allow a little bit of foreign dairy products to come into Canada, but still we keep this industry pretty shielded. So the Bloc Québécois, and it's not a surprise that it's the Bloc Québécois because of how supply management sort of favors Quebec, and we can get into that side of it. But the Bloc Québécois has tried once already. A bill that did pass the House of Commons actually stalled in the Senate before the election. So they're trying again. And so what's interesting is you've got the rest of the ag industry, very worried about all of this because we rely on the U.S. market, foreign markets quite heavily. I mean, just in beef and canola in Alberta, we're talking about billions of dollars in exports every year that could be jeopardized if we're going to put these trade agreements at risk in order to protect the small segments of the ag sector. So there's that issue. But what it was also trying to get across, I think it's relevant in the conversation about does Alberta get a fair deal from the rest of Canada, is an interesting study last week. University of Saskatchewan ag professor Stuart Smythe put out a piece on why maybe we should look at winding down supply management. What's interesting about what he found is that it artificially restrains the dairy industry in the West, that supply management through its quotas props up, basically subsidizes the dairy industry in Quebec, which is maybe why it's become such a third rail in Canadian politics, but limits the industry in Alberta. If we didn't have it, as we've seen with other sectors of agriculture, it would more naturally evolve to the West. So we've got a policy that now the Bloc Québécois is trying to enshrine into law and keeping out of trade talks, but a policy that does kind of in a way screw over the West rather, but doesn't get the same attention as maybe other issues. So those were the 2 points I was getting at.
Cousin, it's great to see your face. Welcome to the show. We've already got comments in the live chat. You know how real talkers are. They've all got strong opinions. Nobody knows more about dairy farming that's watching or listening to this show than you do. And I'm sure you won't be surprised to see some people in the chat going, oh, we're going to talk about the Canadian dairy cartel. What's your take on supply management and potentially more relevant to this show? Where's your head at when you hear people starting to talk about ripping it up?
Well, just a little back. Like, I'm not speaking on the industry as a whole, just a producer's perspective. And from my perspective, we are a very diversified farm too. So our grain and our forage parts are about the same size as my dairy part. So I can speak on behalf of a grain farming perspective and a dairy farming perspective. So as far as the dairy goes, I mean, I think that we don't talk very much about some of the things that keep it less volatile for consumers as well as producers. The industry is way bigger in Quebec and Ontario. Like, we on the West, like, we're a small player in Canada as far as the dairy business goes. It's huge compared to, or ours is minute compared to what it is in Quebec and Ontario. But yeah, there's a lot of arguments that could be made on both sides. From a producer perspective, the thought of getting rid of it, it doesn't necessarily scare me. I think we could survive in an industry as we can if we would. But I think there'd be a lot of challenges and have to be a pretty major process for us to get from where we are now to get to a industry where we are maybe looking at an export market or anything like that. There's a big process to go through to get to it, to not devastate the industry.
Okay. Rob, in a second, I want to ask you about the argument for eliminating supply management, maybe some of the opportunities it could create for ag entrepreneurs, as well as maybe a benefit for consumers. But Graham, let me ask you first. I mean, pretty obvious question, and we're not asking you to open up your books on the show, but am I safe to assume that the value of the quota, which is kind of how supply management works, that's how much milk you're essentially allowed to produce, right? The value of your quota would be significant in the context of the overall value of the operation, right?
Yeah, our quota values it's high. It's really high. Our land value is higher though. So the amount of growth from when my dad ran the farm, what he was paying for a quarter section of land to what we're paying now, that's growing about the same rate as our quota value has. So, I mean, when you're talking about values in agriculture, it doesn't matter what sector you're talking about. They're huge right now. Like, you want to talk about buying a combine, you want to talk about dairy quota, you want to talk about land. It's just the values are through the roof everywhere. So, yeah, the value's high, but so is everything else we're doing.
Okay, fair. Rob, the kind of the three pillars of supply management: production control, right? Pricing mechanisms, and then import control. What's the most compelling argument that you've seen for rethinking or getting rid of supply management?
Well, I think there's several, but I mean, first of all, to look at it from a consumer perspective, right? Because this has never been a policy that's aimed about, what's in the best interest of consumers. So when you limit production and you fix prices, inevitably consumers are going to pay more for these products. Here's an example from 2012 to 2014. There was an estimated 6.8 billion liters of milk basically just dumped out, just gone to waste. I mean, we could have put that in the market, that could have gone to, food banks or got to the public somehow. But because we need to limit production so we don't necessarily negatively impact the price, that excess production gets dumped. So that seems like a tremendous waste, especially, when people are concerned about food prices. There was a study by researchers at the University of Manitoba estimated that supply management essentially amounts to a tax of anywhere from $300 to $500 for Canadian families each year. So I think from the consumer perspective, that's significant. But I think also when we look at the ag industry, again, it's beef producers, it's pork producers, it's lentil producers, it's canola producers that are really worried about the extent to which we're going to go to bat for supply management because it's putting all of them at risk. So I think it's unfortunate we get into the conversation about supply management and we think, well, what about the farmers? Well, which farmers? And by the way, it should be noted, in 1971, before supply management, there were 120,000 dairy farms in Canada. Today, there's just over 9,000. So there's been tremendous amount of consolidation. Most of that, I think, as mentioned, has been in Ontario and Quebec, and it's really in the hands of some really large dairy companies. So again, I think supply management gets in the way of the rest of the agriculture industry. They're affected by imperiling our trade agreements and trade talks, and even just the dairy industry in the West. And I think the point I was making earlier is worth repeating, that we would have a larger dairy industry in the West if it were not for supply management artificially keeping it in the East.
Do you agree, Graham?
To us, like, yes and no. I think there's truth there, but there's also not. I mean, agriculture gets affected by not just from my grain side. We get affected. We have tariffs on right now from China because Canada put tariffs on against EVs coming in from China. So my grain end's more affected right now by tariffs and counter tariffs that have nothing to do with the dairy industry than they do from trade negotiations with the dairy industry. Like you look at Kuzma, they allowed milk to come in. From what I understand, since Kuzma's come in, there hasn't been any tariffs paid on dairy. They haven't even met their allocation for what they're allowed to ship to Canada. So there's tariffs on once they hit that percentage of imports, but right now the States isn't shipping that much to us. And part of that is because right now the dairy industry across the world, we're short on milk, so they need all the milk they can get down there. So it's less of a hot button topic for the Americans right now than it was, say, when Trump ran the first time. And that was a huge, huge issue when they were overproducing milk like crazy and their prices were like at rock bottom. Then they were pushing it and trying to get it here. Right now, their prices are really good in the States. Dairy farmers are making really good money. They're not pushing that like it was. And I think there probably is some argument that that's a pushback with some trade deals. But I mean, right now, yeah, as far as canola goes, our canola prices are pushed down because of backlash from tariffs from China because of the tariffs on electric vehicles coming in from China and stuff like that. So we got affected. In agriculture, it seems like we always get affected by everything.
Yeah, and I think that's off a lot of people's radar, to be honest with you. If there's not, mud on your boots, if you're not actually out there on the farm, you might not have a clear understanding. Until some people see price increases at the grocery store, that's when I think things are reiterated to people pretty clearly. Graham, you and I, in a text exchange before we started recording the show, you told me that you think there's an argument that the quota system, that supply management essentially benefits consumers more than producers. What's the argument there?
Well, I think so. We're in cattle a bit too, and if you look at the last 3 years in the beef market and what you're paying for beef in the grocery store, there, as a farmer, I could easily see that if we didn't have quota, that the milk price would have gone the same way the beef price has gone in the last couple of years. Honestly, right now, I wish I had a couple thousand beef cows that we were calving that would have, that we were able to sell into market, because the prices, more than doubled in the last couple of years. So, and whereas the dairy, we're relatively steady. We don't see the fluctuations up and down. A couple of years ago, our grain end way outdid our dairy end because the markets were crazy. The markets were, canola was almost double what it is right now. The dairy, we just don't see that. We have a margin we make. We're not printing money on the dairy margins. We watch our margins all the time, and it's relatively tight. We watch what we're doing. If we would be careless, we would go under. The same with the other ends of our business, but you know, the margins are okay, but they're not crazy high, and we also just don't see those fluctuations. So I think the consumers don't see as much of those fluctuations either.
Rob, kind of an interesting, I know everybody knows Sylvain Charlebois, kind of a polarizing commentator on the food industry in Canada, describes himself as the food professor. He's written a piece for the Kindersley Clarion, shout out to Saskatchewan, where he says that Canada's dairy addiction is turning Canada into a trade pariah. He says that our nation risks global isolation by protecting milk and eggs. And he references the House of Commons unanimously approving Bill C-202, which is a law prohibiting Canada from making any trade concessions involving supply-managed sectors, dairy, poultry, and eggs. Do you think that there's political risk here for the Liberal government? Like it always comes down to where you're willing to expend political capital. How risky? I mean, you described the third rail earlier, but how risky do you think this is for Prime Minister Mark Carney and this government?
Well, I think there is a big risk. And I mean, it gets back to the point I was making that we kind of complain all the time in Alberta that, they favor Quebec and Ottawa. And sometimes it's kind of vague when we say that. But here's a clear example of it. I think back to Andrew Scheer when he ran for the Conservative leadership and he's chugging the milk in Quebec for a photo op. And yeah, the last time the Bloc Québécois tried to do this, it passed the House of Commons because I think, the Liberals and even to some extent the Conservatives were scared to get in the way of this. It was only because the Senate kind of did its job and said, well, what is this? Why are we doing this? And they took the time to study it and it kind of died on the order paper. So yeah, I think there's all kinds of political risk because of the Quebec factor here. But again, I think the bigger risk is what's this going to do to our trading relationships and our trade talks? You talk about tariffs on canola, and yeah, that's what we're worried about, right? Is our these foreign export markets limiting Canadian products? Think about how devastating it was back during Mad Cow when Canadian beef couldn't get into so many countries, right? It was devastating to the industry because we rely on exports. I think, unfortunately, these supply managed sectors, they don't care. What if other countries put a 300% tariff on Canadian dairy? Why would they care? We don't export any. But you think about the 6 billion liters of milk that have gone to waste over 12 years. What if we exported that? Australia, New Zealand, they moved away from supply management type policies. They export dairy products. It just seems odd to me that the Canadian farmers can compete internationally when it comes to beef and grain and lentils and canola and pork and go down the list. And yet when we sort of think about dairy or eggs, we just think that it's so fragile and vulnerable that we need these layers of government protection. Otherwise, it's not going to survive. I don't buy that.
So, Graham, I guess the question now is, and again, as mentioned, you're here speaking as an individual operator. You're the cousin of the host of the show. You're not speaking on behalf of milk boards across Canada or anything like that. But what are your colleagues saying? What are your fellow farmers saying? Like, where do you think this all goes within the industry, the guys that you're talking to?
I mean, right now, it actually, I took over the farm in 2002. I started taking over. The last year and a half, it's probably been the quietest that it's been in those 20 plus years that I've been part of it. It's really not a hot button issue right now. I think food security is, more of a hot button issue. I think that, the dairy industry in the States is so strong right now. They're building multiple big plants there. They're not pushing to get in. It's just because there's a shortage everywhere. It's not really a hot button issue. And for us, the industry right now is recovered from COVID, and processors have caught up with some upgrades, and so our industry is relatively healthy. We're seeing marginal growth, which is good to see again. So as far as the things that are concerning our industry, I think whether quotas on the table or not right now is really not even that hot button of an issue. It still is always something to talk about, but I think it's quieter than it's been the last bit.
What is so the tariff thing? Obviously significant for you. Can you put into perspective, like numbers or otherwise, percentage of profit margin, that sort of an idea on a fluctuation? Like, let's say your exports, like anything involving China being tariffed. How big of a deal is that in terms that the average person could understand?
Well, I mean, on our grain end, it's huge. And I mean, it's nothing new on our grain end. It's something we deal with all the time. We grow peas, we grow yellow peas, and they almost 100% of them get shipped to India. And those tariffs are on and off every year. It seems like there's a tariff threat with that one every year. China, the canola is on and off. It's, agriculture just gets thrown into political gameplay in between nations all the time. It's an easy one to throw tariffs on. It affects like politically. There's a lot of backlash, but from the farmer's perspective, we just sort of have to roll with it, and there's not a lot we can do. So right now, the one with the states, it's huge. We inadvertently do trade dairy products. We sell a lot of dairy cattle into the states, and with tariffs on cattle, that was making it unfeasible to send anything to the states. It just didn't make any sense. So, and with the beef too, if there's tariffs on that, that'll devastate the industry like massively. Yeah, we'll just roll with it and see what happens.
It's the way you've always done it, cousin. It's great to see your face. I know you got to go actually tend to the farm. So thanks for making time for us. We appreciate it. And we'll look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon.
I'm good. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, you got it. Hey, Real Talkers, by the way, you can follow Gloryview Farms on Instagram if you want to see more about the operation. This is one that we're all really proud of. Obviously, I have no dirt under my fingernails, and Graham runs the show. Just like his dad Daryl and his mom Karen did, just like his grandpa Ralph did before him, and his legendary wife Bernice, and just like his dad Andrew did, and like his dad Jens did when the Jespersen family came over to Alberta from Denmark via South Dakota. The fifth generation raising the sixth generation out there on one of Alberta's longest standing dairy farms, right on the Yellowhead at the turnoff to Stony Plain. We're going to keep hanging out with Rob Breakenridge. We got a ton to talk about. Rob's joining us from Calgary, that city, obviously getting set to welcome the G7 in nearby Kananaskis country. That means that Air Force One and all the other big jets are going to be landing at the Calgary airport, and obviously everybody's going to be paying attention to those negotiations around the table with the American president in the room. Obviously changes the tone a little bit. Plus, new polling on the UCP Danielle Smith and Naheed Nenshi, the Alberta NDP leader, really lagging behind. What's behind that? We'll get into it with Rob Breakenridge in just a second. First, we want to let you know that these conversations on Real Talk, including the ones on business and the bottom line, happen with the support of North Road Investment Council. If you go to their website, northroadic.com, you can learn more about their digital risk advisory program. They're the only team in the space that is offering this program with such fulsome depth. They've got a dedicated team member. All that team member does is digital risk advisory. They're helping North Road clients make sure that they understand where they could be vulnerable with their online presence. It's just another benefit of working with North Road Investment Council, a steady hand and a studied voice to guide you through wealth and investing. Successful saving can create unexpected challenges, and that's where Marshall and Carrie and their team of financial advisors come in. If you've got questions relating to your family's financial security, reach out to them today at northroadic.com. We talk a lot about Park Power, how proud we are to have them powering our Real Talk live chat. We'll be getting to you live chatters in just a second. Park Power is offering the lowest fixed electricity rate in the province right now. You can learn more at parkpower.ca. And make sure you add the /Real Talk there. Parkpower.ca/Real Talk is where you can see exclusive offerings to knock up to $150 off your first bill when you switch over to Park Power. It's easy to do. They'll break up with your previous provider. You don't have to have that awkward phone call. And before you know it, you'll be paying lower rates than your neighbors and your friends on internet, electricity, and natural gas. It's all part of the offering with Park Power, your friendly local utilities provider at parkpower.ca/Real Talk. Our friends at Friesen Brothers know all about food. We're talking poultry, dairy, we're talking eggs. Friesen Brothers has been operating proudly, Alberta-owned, Alberta-grown 70 years ago, if you can believe it. Humble beginnings, a butcher shop in Hinton, Alberta, now serving 16 communities. And we congratulate them on their 70th anniversary. They've got some fun stuff coming up this weekend. If you don't yet have plans for Father's Day, you've got to check out their Medieval Times Feast, an all-you-can-eat feast on the 14th and 15th of June at their Fresh Market locations from 4 to 8 p.m. You can find out all the details on their website. An all-you-can-eat medieval feast, just $25 per person at Friesen Brothers. And a shout-out to our friends at the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce. Had so much fun joining them about 12 hours ago at the Junior Achievement Northern Alberta Business Hall of Fame. Edmonton Chamber members are all about that. Networking, connecting, elevating the impact that the business community has in political and social discussions, and the networking, well, unparalleled. You can check out their Instagram. If you don't yet follow them, they're on there at Edmonton Chamber. See what they're up to. They've got some great resources for those of you that are observing and celebrating the Oilers Stanley Cup run. Plus, they've got a jam-packed events calendar through the summer. You can learn more about the benefits of membership with the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce by visiting their website. That's edmontonchamber.com. Rob Breakenridge, our guest. He is the host of The Rob Breakenridge Show. You can find out more at robbreakenridge.ca. I encourage you to subscribe to his podcast and, of course, give him a follow on X. That G7, obviously a huge opportunity for the province of Alberta, and obviously, eyes around the world will be keen to see. I should probably name all the people that'll be around the table, but it's Donald Trump and everybody else right now. What's one story or one issue that you're particularly focused on, Rob?
Well, it's interesting because we've got the Global Petroleum Show happening in Calgary this week, and that's going to segue right into the G7. And already there's warnings to Calgarians about all the traffic tie-ups as all these dignitaries start arriving here next week. I mean, I think that, the biggest story going into this is, where are things at between Mark Carney and Donald Trump. We're hearing these stories this week, reports that maybe we're close to some kind of, I don't know what it is. You think how long it took to get to CUSMA, which was an actual trade agreement. This almost seems like more of a kind of deal, which is maybe how Donald Trump likes to do things, but some sort of agreement between Canada and the U.S., and maybe we can start to put some of this drama behind us. I think the G7 would be a great backdrop for that, but I guess the question is, what does Donald Trump want out of this? Does Donald Trump want to come and show that, he can still get along with world leaders, and they've been touting deals, and he can produce deals, or is he going to come here and cause chaos? So that's kind of the big question looming over all of this, I think. Yeah,
and like all of this amid just a wild scenario in the state of California. You've got literally thousands of National Guard members. You've got thousands of demonstrators and protesters. You have everybody's seeing video, I think, in their social media feeds of toddlers appearing in court before judges. Like it's a situation that's very difficult to wrap your mind around. It feels like I recognize that there's been instability around the world before, and I recognize that there have been disruptive leaders and that sort of a thing, but it just feels like everything is different. Everything feels unprecedented, quite frankly.
Yeah, don't forget this weekend, Donald Trump's going to have this big, weird birthday military parade. So there's going to be that. It's interesting, too. And I think there's some pushback from, I think within the Liberal Party or maybe the Liberal base for Mark Carney, in that, he's playing nice with Donald Trump, or he's inviting India's prime minister, or now we're inviting the Saudi leader to come. Like, to what extent are we tolerating these troubling things we're seeing in other countries? So I think there's that question too. Is it all just about geopolitical realism, or what point do we kind of stand on principle and start calling out certain things? So I think that's a bit of another political backdrop to all of this.
Yeah, no kidding. So this, this amid kind of an interesting dynamic as well between the Prime Minister and the Premiers, who met just, I guess, about a week ago, that First Ministers meeting. And a big part of that was obviously getting to the action phase of the Prime Minister's promise on election night that there would be free trade in Canada by Canada Day. Now, he's since walked it back a little bit and said that the Liberals will at least have a plan by July 1st, but this is a big one. If you want to talk about, the United States disrupting trade with Canada and the future of the Canadian economy and exploring new export options and the like, most people, including business advocacy groups, chambers of commerce, are saying, well, we could see like a 2, 3, 4% bump in our GDP if we could figure that out. The interprovincial trade barriers. How optimistic are you that something will happen? And is there one project or one focus in particular that you're holding?
Well, I think on trade barriers, I think we're seeing a lot of progress. Interestingly enough, it actually really falls to the provinces to do this. It's provincial trade barriers that impact trade across the country. There's not as much that the federal government can do to speed that along. But yeah, I mean, if Ottawa's going to do its part, great. And I think we've seen some encouraging signs. Some of the agreements we saw around that First Ministers meeting, Alberta signed a memorandum of understanding with Ontario. I think Nova Scotia's kind of showing the way in the legislation they brought forward to really across the board start removing these trade barriers. And it's just silly things. Like, it's not meant as tariffs or protectionist policy. It's just kind of provinces saying, well, we're going to do things one way, and other provinces do things a different way. And it just creates red tape and headaches for businesses that are doing business across the country. So I think as we just kind of standardize a lot of these things, recognize what other provinces are doing and sort of accept that as legit, I think it makes it far easier to do business in this country. And so that's low-hanging fruit, and that can have tremendous economic benefits. So I'm optimistic on that front. The other part of what Mark Carney has announced, the nation-building projects, the sped up timeline for all of this. It all sounds good on paper, but this is going to be a lot more difficult. And already we've seen where Mark Carney is hesitant to press forward if there's opposition or resistance anywhere. And sure, it'd be great if everybody's on the same page. Like we saw the first ministers meeting, everybody's happy. But when push comes to shove, there's going to be contention. There's going to be controversy or disagreement. And so how much political capital is Mark Carney going to expend? How far is he willing to push this along if he truly believes that these things are in the national interest? And, pipelines are front and center and all of that.
Yeah, the Alberta's premier has obviously been banging that drum, and I think everybody is familiar with, at least to a certain degree, her list of 9 demands that she, you might call them Alberta's top priorities, or at least her top priorities, submitted to the Prime Minister. One of those, of course, is increased pipeline access in all directions. And she's, doing her best to make a compelling argument to her fellow Canadians and to international markets, I guess, that Alberta is being held back. They've been held back by environmental policy, been held back by a lack of pipelines. Kind of an interesting exchange. This has been making the rounds, this clip. Premier Danielle Smith just a few days ago talking to CTV host Vashi Kapelos, in which she makes the claim that Alberta's or Canada's got some of the lowest living standards in the world. She walks it back right after she says it. Rob, I want to ask you about it, but first, here's what we're talking about.
For the 4th consecutive year, production of crude oil and equivalent projects reached a record high in 2024, up 4.3% from 2023. I do really quickly want to turn to asking you about...
I just want to say, we have an aspiration to double our production, and we could have been at already probably 6 to 7 to 8 million barrels a day. That's what I'm looking at. And why should we hold ourselves back when we know the world wants our products? This is the time for us to build them.
Yeah, I guess I'm just countering the idea that things are destitute or that nothing is being developed or production is extremely capped. Like the numbers bear out a different story. They're not perhaps as high as you and other people in the province or maybe even across the country want to see, but they're not going down.
Vashi, we've got the lowest living standards in the world. Like we're falling behind all the OECD countries in productivity growth and standard of living growth. And that's because these are the kind of projects that consistently fail and do not get built. So we can't sugarcoat that. That is a reality. If we want to be a rich country and we want to be able to keep up with our neighbors in growth, we've got to build things. We've got to dig things out of the ground. We've got to get products to market. We can't keep on borrowing and borrowing and borrowing and watching the kind of situation that we've seen over the last 10 years develop. That is not what Albertans want. It's not what Canadians want. And so I think there needs to be a complete attitude adjustment about all of these projects because we've lost a lot of opportunity across the board, across the country.
Is she working this in the right direction to achieve a national attitude adjustment?
I think in short, no. I mean, I don't know. I mean, how much does she care about convincing the rest of the country of all of this? I think there are those in Alberta, sort of the separatist or separatist sympathetic crowd that don't really care anymore what the rest of the country thinks. So, but look, I think what she says at the end there is a compelling argument that, yes, we've had a decade of relatively weak or flat economic growth and productivity growth, and these kinds of projects are a great way of addressing that. And then that speaks to not just Alberta, but all of Canada. But yeah, I think the perception that, the richest province doesn't think it's rich enough, the way that comes across, I think some Canadians might raise an eyebrow. When you hear leaders like Danielle Smith say, well, the Liberals have destroyed the oil sector, and when Vashi Kapelos points out that, well, I mean, producing at record levels, that hardly seems like destruction. I think it's important to be clear about what our concerns are. And yes, I mean, we are producing at record levels. That's a good thing. It's a good thing for Alberta. It's a good thing for Canada. But we're getting to a point now where if we want to grow that, we're going to have to make some big decisions. So, yeah, I mean, look, getting Trans Mountain approved and built was a positive, and I think it's worth highlighting that. But yeah, it's hard to imagine that, with the price crash of a decade ago or what happened during COVID, that we otherwise would be at double our production levels now. That seems like a bit of a stretch. But yeah, I think there's a way to make that case to Canadians in a compelling way, and I think Danielle Smith is capable of it. I think she's done it, but I think at times maybe that message gets a little bit derailed as it did there.
Yeah, you talk to anybody, and this is just kind of the way that retail politics works, and You'll talk to anybody about something the premier has said or a policy that the Alberta government's holding, a position they're taking, and people will say, well, her approval rating doesn't seem to be hurting. She appears to be popular. I've got a friend who keenly watches Alberta politics from Ontario. Always reaches out to me. He's like, Smith still flying high? Like, everybody's kind of got that impression. At the same time, you see the Alberta NDP leader. We don't call him the opposition leader because he doesn't have a seat in the legislature yet, but Naheed Nenshi kind of languishing in the polls a little bit. You've written about it on your Substack, which I want to encourage people to subscribe to support your independent journalism at robbreakenridge.ca. It'll take you right there. You wrote this on the 6th of June. NDP polling sag. Credit to Smith or blame to Nenshi? Take us into it.
Well, I get the sense that, among some of the NDP or kind of on the progressive left in Alberta, there's a little bit of panic. Like, why hasn't there been a honeymoon for Naheed Nenshi? Why are the NDP doing better in the polls? Or why does the UCP seem to be defying gravity? To me, I think a huge factor was the federal election. I think if Pierre Poilievre were the prime minister, it would be a much different kind of discussion in Alberta, political atmosphere in Alberta. I think all the government's problems or controversies or scandals would be front and center. When there's a Liberal government in Ottawa, that's a much different conversation. And Danielle Smith and the UCP really own this whole political brand of, we're going to stand up to the Liberals. We're going to be the champions of Alberta. And it's convenient, too, because, anything bad going on in Alberta that might otherwise be a problem for an incumbent government, well, that's the Liberals' fault. We'd be doing much better if we didn't have the Liberals. So it's a convenient deflection, and it's a dilemma for Naheed Nenshi. I mean, he's not going to outflank the UCP on criticizing Ottawa or the Liberals, but I think when he seems as kind of meek or like this isn't a big issue for him, I don't know that resonates with kind of where Albertans are at right now. So I think Naheed Nenshi's a moderate NDP leader. He's pro-pipeline. I think, he's saying the right things. It's just, it's a difficult political atmosphere right now for him. And I'm not sure how you get around that. Look, if Pierre Poilievre were the prime minister, I think Naheed Nenshi would have a really good shot at being the next premier. As things stand now, I don't see it.
Yeah, what would you do if you were advising him? I'd be curious to know. Like, a lot of people will say, well, what should he be doing differently? Obviously, they're chomping at the bit for this by-election, and I think you get into the legislature. Obviously, it gives you that advantage as you outline in your piece. But is there some other way? I think it's just like maybe people just. I don't know. I don't know that I even have the words to articulate it, Rob, but it's just not resonating. It just feels like it's never really this sort of like Nenshi leadership has never really taken off in the way that you thought it might.
Well, I think, having a seat in the legislature and being there, that'll help, right? Just his profile, his visibility, we don't see a lot from him, and maybe there are other ways he could get out there. I think, too, articulating a vision, right? Because it was always sort of an awkward merger of the purple Nenshi brand and the orange NDP brand. And what does this new thing look like? What do they stand for? What would they be doing differently? So I think it's also about sort of articulating a vision and not just hoping that some scandal is going to come along and derail the government, to really articulate what it is that you stand for and why Albertans should give you some consideration. I heard an interesting proposition from someone who said to me that maybe there's a way for the NDP to really almost outflank the UCP on the pipelines issue, but do it in a kind of progressive sort of political way that, we need the revenue from these kinds of projects to really build up the social safety net, the kinds of things that New Democrats want to do. We're not going to be able to do it if we don't see these pipeline projects built. So he could come at it more aggressively in a way, but do it from that perspective to sort of capitalize on what I think a lot of Albertans are thinking about these days, but do it in a different way and frame it in a different way, sort of a uniquely Alberta progressive kind of way. That might be one way of going about it, but it's tough sledding right now. And here's the thing, like, people know who he is, right? It's not as though he's introducing himself to Albertans. So the fact that he's polling so poorly right now should be a worry.
Yeah, I agree. I'm just looking to call it up right now. There's different polling aggregators, and I know that people follow all kinds of different accounts. This one, the source on this one is Canadian Polling on X. And by the way, federal polling, interesting to see. The Liberals up about 10 points on the Conservatives right now. The Liberals are down a point in support at 43%. The Conservatives are down 8 points, which is kind of interesting as well, if you keep an eye on that. But the Alberta polling, interesting too, and I think that people might be surprised to see it, or maybe not. The UCP polling at 58% support, which is up 5 points. The NDP, like a full 26 points down, Rob, at 32%, and they're down 12 points, which is really like, I just think if you're an NDP supporter, if you're an NDP MLA, you're looking at that and you're going, not only are you 26 points back, which as Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney proved a while ago, is not unsurmountable. But at the same time, you're not just 26 points back. You've dropped 12 points in support since the last time the pollsters got at this. So you're looking at not only a scenario where it's an unhealthy situation for you and your party, but you're bleeding, you know? And you got it's not just that you're stagnant and sitting there. You're actively losing support. And that's where I think the red flags have got to be flying.
And the other thing, look, I think the NDP are maybe hoping like this healthcare procurement scandal blows up into something bigger, something that's going to come along to really change the political dynamic. But that could go the other way. Like, what if Danielle Smith and Mark Carney reach some kind of big grand agreement where we see, a new pipeline approved, or something that Danielle Smith can really point to and say, look what I accomplished. Like, that's the other side of it. The assumption that the UCP are doing as well as they're going to, and this is kind of the peak. I don't know if that's the case. And if Danielle Smith can pull some rabbit out of a hat, that might make the situation even worse. And again, even though Alberta has legislation that technically stipulates an election every 4 years, there's nothing really stopping the government if they felt that the opportunity was there from rolling the dice on an early election. Like, we're probably going to the polls next year in some capacity, referendum on whatever, and why not throw an election into the mix? So that might be a temptation for the UCP. And so, yeah, there's a worry there, I think, for the NDP.
For sure. Hey, we talked to your city's mayor, my home city's mayor, Dr. Jody Gondek, on the show just yesterday. Check this out. So if you check out our Real Talk YouTube channel, encourage everybody to subscribe there. Hit the bell, by the way, so it lets you know every time that we're live streaming. But you can scroll down past the live episodes, and that's where you'll find our shorts. This one that Johnny's put together, titled Population Explosion. We talked to Calgary's mayor about how the city is managing a mind-blowing addition, like 275 new residents every single day. Check this out. When you actually think about it, like, you're adding a Red Deer almost every year.
When you have 275 people moving to our city every day, we need to make sure that we are building new housing, but that we are doing redevelopment in areas where we can provide more choice of housing for people. So
that's wild. What is that, about 8,000 or 9,000 people a month?
it's a lot of people. We've probably invested, $500 million in making sure that we're able to convert former office towers into housing for people who can better access the amenities of downtown and their potential workplace. We've made sure that we are providing better green spaces, better public spaces. We've really tried to strengthen our tax base through putting those investments into downtown, because we all know that when those towers are operating at capacity, they are valued much higher, and that gives us strong property tax revenue.
When you actually So there it is. That's Mayor Jody Gondek. It's hard to believe, like, a city like this. I guess probably people in Los Angeles and New York would chuckle at us, Rob. But you look at a city adding, 6, 7, 8% of its total population every single year, and then you actually think in practical terms. Like, Johnny was laughing at me yesterday because I sounded like a child as I'm trying to sort this out. But I'm like, actually imagine adding like 1,500 people every single week. Great opportunity for builders and developers if they can source their materials. If there's demand, there's obviously going to be demand, maybe not as affordable as some people would like. But Calgary's growing pains, and Alberta's growing pains for that matter. The provincial population expected to double in the next 25 years, which is another wild statistic that people should be keeping an eye on. How does that land with you? What does it make you think about?
Well, one thing I do think about, and I mean, it gets back to what we talked about earlier, I think a bigger Alberta means more clout. If we want more say, or we want the politicians to care what Albertans think, I think the bigger we are, maybe the more that happens. So I think it's good in a way, but it's difficult to manage, especially when it happens this quickly. And, the federal government pulls some of these levers in terms of how much the country's growing. The Alberta government has some say in how much people are coming here and how much we're encouraging people to here. So the cities are kind of at the mercy of all of this, but they're the ones sort of on the forefront of trying to respond. And it's a real challenge, right? Because, infrastructure, there's overlapping responsibilities there between the cities and the province, or shared funding responsibilities. Are we doing enough to keep up with it? And if not, what can cities do? It is kind of funny in a political sense, because I think the one thing that Jody Gondek can point to as something that happened under her watch was this blanket rezoning. that I think can help address some of the housing demand in Calgary. But that was hugely controversial, and that might actually be a political albatross for her going into the election here this fall. So it's not an easy job, whether it's being the mayor of Calgary or the mayor of Edmonton right now with all of these growth pressures. But yeah, I think it's a political uphill battle for Mayor Gondek.
I saw that you recently spoke with Calgary mayoral candidate and former councillor Jeremy Farkas, who's a good friend of this show as well. Again, people can check out robbreakenridge.ca or robbreakenridge.substack.com. What's your take on, I mean, it may still be early. You could have other contenders throwing their hats into the ring, but I've seen Calgary's mayoral race described as crowded with some pretty serious candidates. You got Councillor Sonia Sharp in there. You got Farkas. You got the incumbent, Jody Gondek, who has obviously her own support. How do you see this playing out? What's the ballot box question in Calgary in October?
Well, I think it's probably similar to the one in Edmonton, right? I mean, I think right now, certainly there's been a lot of concern around crime and public safety, and especially when it comes to public transit, that's something that needs to be addressed. Concern over property taxes, concern over spending. I mentioned the housing debate, a lot of those issues. So that's all front and center, I think, in Calgary. I'm curious to see the impact of political parties and how that changes not just this election, but politics after the election in the two big cities. That's a bit of a wild card because we haven't had that before. I think the thing in municipal politics, incumbents do tend to benefit because of the name recognition, and maybe parties are meant to level that playing field a bit. But I think still for now, this could actually help Jody Gondek, right? Where even if she's down to 30 or 35% support, which is not a big number, that might actually be enough to emerge from the pack if there's enough vote splitting going on. And you could have that factor here with a couple of, you mentioned them, well-known challengers and maybe others that jump in. So that becomes a bit of a wild card. I don't know, people have an appetite for runoff elections or anything like that. So that's the system we have, and that could help the incumbent.
How are you enjoying, by the way, going at this yourself? How you're what, 7 episodes in of the Rob Breakenridge show, produced independently? You got the Substack coming. How's the audience building going? How's it for a guy that was in Main Street? You still are. I mean, you still contribute to the Calgary Herald. Obviously, people are bringing you on for your punditry on broadcasts across the country. But you're now eating what you kill, as they say. How's the first little bit been?
It's been fun. It's been liberating. I mean, it's also been a little bit of time on the sidelines, not by choice necessarily, but right. Yeah, it's good to get back in it. It's good to be busy. It's good to start having these conversations again and hearing from people. It's fun. This is what we love to do, and good to get back doing it.
I saw that you spoke with Dr. Mark Tyndall on flavored vaping products. I just have to ask you about the take. Do you personally vape?
No, I don't. But
seems like everybody does.
Dr. Mark Tyndall,
right?
People should look him up. Dr. Mark Tyndall, he's at UBC. He used to be the deputy provincial health officer in BC. He's with the BC Centers for Disease Control, and he's been kind of at the front of the harm reduction debate around harder drugs and other issues. But he just wrote a book about vaping, and he's sort of taken his whole lens of harm reduction and applied it to this issue. Like, we need to get people off of cigarettes. We've made tremendous progress, but we're not at the finish line yet. And so kind of our regulatory approach right now to safer alternatives is kind of holding us back. And so he's making the argument that, look, we can really accomplish something big here if we recognize that getting people off of cigarettes is a huge public health achievement, even if that means they're going to less harmful, but still using nicotine products, whether it be vaping or pouches or whatever. If we had that switch happen tomorrow, that would be a huge public health benefit. And we're just not looking at it the right way, he said.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know if and I'm more of a free market guy. Like I've always thought it was bizarre that, Canada federally has banned like certain flavored nicotine products. Obviously, it was a big deal. I think mostly the grannies and the bingo crowd were the most pissed off when Canada banned menthol cigarettes, and people had to find alternative ways of purchasing them. Now people still get their menthols that are falling off the back of the truck wherever. But I understand the rationale behind it. I understand why, from a branding perspective, some of the stuff makes sense. They don't want products like appealing to kids. But then on the flip side, you have ridiculous bans on the ban, the bans that go around cigars. Cigar aficionados like myself That's a form of art. Those bands are incredible marketing. People collect the bands. If you're not big into cigars, maybe that's off your radar. But I just think it's absolutely ridiculous to suggest that by covering up the bands, and a lot of exporters won't even send cigars to Canada now because of it, because they don't want to deal with the hassle. I don't know how many 13 and 14-year-olds were crushing Cuban cigars. I don't think anybody. So I'm kind of more of like, I think you should let the market lead. I also believe that it's ridiculous that at the outset that there are products that are available that we know are going to kill you. We know cigarettes are going to kill you. But, of course, the Canadian government collects an incredible amount of tax revenue from cigarettes as well. I bet a buddy $100 in the year 2000 that by 2010 cigarettes would be outlawed. He said yes. I said no way. He still hasn't paid me for that. But I'd be curious to know, Rob, if there's the gateway of does it work the other way? Like, does somebody who has access to like a grape-flavored vape pen, or that has access to these like lip pillows, these nicotine pouches that everybody seems to be using on the golf course these days, like how many of those people see that as a gateway into tobacco use, into smoking cigarettes? I would imagine very few. And I can recognize that there is some value, like for a cigarette smoker to transition to a vape. Probably no doctor is going to say that vaping's healthy, but it's probably healthier. I wonder if there is the risk that it goes the other way. Like, how many people vape and then start smoking cigarettes when they didn't smoke before?
Well, it seems very few. And I mean, that kind of gets back to the point about flavors. I mean, if we're going to force vapes or pouches to taste like tobacco, well, I think we run the risk that maybe that makes going in that direction easier. I mean, if you can have flavored vaping products or pouches, and then you've got these disgusting tobacco-flavored cigarettes, why would anyone make the switch? So, but the good news is that we haven't seen it, right? We've seen, especially since the onset of vaping products, a pretty sharp decline in cigarette smoking, especially among youth. I mean, we're to the point where 1 or 2% of teenagers are regular smokers, which is incredible. When you think about that number, it was more like 25% in the late 90s. And I remember, being in high school and being around that age, and I had friends who smoked, and there was, the crowd of teenagers that would gather outside the doors and smoke cigarettes. Cigarette smoking among teenagers is almost obsolete. And I know the critics say, well, we've kind of traded that for a different problem where, there's vaping or pouches. But I think even the good news there, and yeah, we did see a spike in teenage vaping rates when these products became available, but that's come down in recent years. So I think that was maybe a bit of a fad or a trend, and we're starting to see that pass. But yeah, look, these should be age-gated products. These should be for adults. Nicotine, in whatever form, should only be available for adults. And I think we need to make sure that we're enforcing that like we do for alcohol or lottery tickets or pornography or whatever else we don't want kids to get their hands on. And we can do that here.
Yeah, well said. It's wild to think back on. I mean, like, you and I are experienced in life. We're not like old AF yet, but we've been around a little bit. And I think if I look at high schoolers today, I would say that they are one generation removed from us. And in the course of one generation, and I would say well before today's high schooler, as a matter of fact, cigarette smoking fell out of fashion in a big way. Like, I remember showing up at Henry Wisewood High School in Calgary, 1992, and I was coming from a small Christian private school as well, so there was like absolutely no smoking on that property. I guarantee you that much. And it blew my mind how many kids, how many people, how many of my fellow students smoked. Like, the smoke pit out back was like the place to be. It was packed. Like, high school parties, it honestly felt like, I don't know if I would say 50%, but I would say easily 30 to 40% of young kids were smoking in the mid 90s for sure.
Yeah, and I kind of count myself lucky because I never did, and I'm not exactly sure why. I mean, I think there was peer pressure around other things that just, I don't know, maybe just never appealed to me or whatever. But I sort of think back that I could have easily fallen into that as a lot of my friends did. And then that becomes a real challenge for people. I think a lot of people who still smoke today could probably trace it back to that as to when and how they started smoking. And, getting back to Mark Tyndall's point, what's going to get them off of that? Because we need to. And I think it's naive. It's almost moralistic, to take the abstinence approach and sort of wag a finger and say, well, you shouldn't be using nicotine at all. I don't know if that's productive. If ultimately we want to get people off of smoking, it's not nicotine that kills. It's what's in cigarettes that kill.
Yeah. Yeah. You can see that interview, by the way, Rob Breakenridge and Dr. Tyndall on Rob's X account. You can follow him there at Rob Breakenridge. And again, you can check out his work. That's robbreakenridge.ca, robbreakenridge.substack.com. A good friend of this show, a fellow independent media entrepreneur, though you may be uncomfortable with me framing it that way, but that's the way that it is, Rob, and you're killing it. And it's nice to check in with you. Thanks for doing this for us.
Oh, yeah. Always fun. Ryan, thanks for having me.
You got it, Rob. Do you remember, like, when you showed up to high school, was that the same sort of experience? Did it feel like 3-4 out of 10 kids were smoking? Like, you're a little bit younger than me, not a ton, a little bit, but was smoking like a big part of your high school experience, at least your friend group?
Yeah, I think every high school when we were in school, and I'm much younger than you, but had a smoking section, and I feel like, yeah, everybody had, at least like out of your 10 friends, 5 or 6 of them smoked back then. I know that's changed drastically nowadays. A lot of people don't smoke, and the people that do smoke are vaping. Yeah. I agree with Rob, and I think it is targeted towards kids. I mean, you go into, you don't vape, but you go into a cigar store, all the vapes are right at the front, and they're all like, they've got colorful packages, they've got candy flavors, almost all of them. Like, none of them are flavored as, there are a few that are nicotine flavored or cigarette flavored, but it's maybe one. And the most popular ones at the front are always like watermelon and pineapple and banana. And there's even ones that are flavored like Coca-Cola and your favorite soda pop. So I think it's totally marketed towards kids.
It totally is.
And I can see why all these policies are pushing for more regulations. And I can see why people who want freedom of, to inhale whatever I want are like, why? But like, go into any store and just look at the packaging. It's all futuristic, the way they look now.
Well, look
and
at
they've
this.
got LED lighting on them. And
look at this.
Yeah, they
look at this. This is if you take
right
this
there.
camera here,
It
that'll
looks
be
like
a little
toy,
bit closer. Right? Take this shot here because we can get the camera a little closer, the one right in front of me. But like this is a cannabis vape that I have in my hand. But like, so describe it for the podcast audience. This looks like a toy for like a 6-year-old, right? It's called Lemon Lynx. It's yellow with pink. It's got kind of like graffiti style writing on it. You can't tell me that's not, like, I don't believe that this vape belongs in the hands of a serious grown adult. Yeah. This looks like something that's designed for like a 13-year-old. Yeah. Would you agree?
And that's cannabis too. That's not even the ones that are nicotine, which, cannabis is one thing, but we know nicotine is way more addictive. And there are some with zero nicotine in there, but when you walk in, again, I'll just say, go into any shop that sells them today and just look. Like the top ones, the ones in the middle is, eye level that they sell the most. I always look at those because I know they're trying to push those. Those are the top sellers. They're always like bubble gum, soda pop, Coca-Cola. It's clearly marketed to kids.
Hey, can you fill 10 seconds for me while I go grab something out of the humidor? We're doing this like show and tell, so I'll be right back in 10 seconds.
So Ryan has an elegant humidor in the office, in his part of the office out there where he's going. You saw him. And it often, people get enamored when they walk in. Oh, you've got the humidor out. While Ryan's coming back, I'll also tell you that you should join as a member on YouTube. Yeah, Head over to YouTube, hit join on our homepage, and select the level of membership. It ranges from Real Talker to Real VIP to VIP. Select your level of sponsorship. Real VIP and Real Deal members get access to our members-only live chat, which has been humming.
Yeah, man.
Maybe it's because of the Oilers playoffs. Maybe it's because of everything going on in Alberta and with the G7. But it's nice to get in there after the show and continue the conversation if you've got time and if that's your thing. You wanna stay stressed about the world in general all day long.
If you're not getting enough from us here. So this is like I had one of our audience members was asking, like, are the cigar bans, are they like banned or are they just heavily regulated? And so here's an example of kind of like, if you're not too familiar, of like how they arrive now. So this is a Casa Turrent cigar. This is like a nice daily driver. We're not smoking cigars daily, but this is an affordable. We're not being paid for this. This is not an advertisement. I'm just showing you how this operates now for those of you that aren't like 100% familiar with cigars or whatever, but just kind of like the stupidity of it, of this ban on the bans. And if I cared like very deeply about this, we'd do entire episodes. I recommend recognize this is not the biggest issue in the world. But if you check this out, so this is how it's sold in Canada right now. For the benefit of those of you on the podcast, it's just a nondescript. It's kind of like almost like an army green or a tan band that goes around the cigar that identifies it's a Casa Turrent, 1973, and then it says A Turrent, obviously something to do with the company, something to do with the brand. But if you take away, so you look at this, and these are mandatory for any cigar that's going to be sold in Canada. But if you peel that off and you take that away, this band, this sort of like pain in the ass, stupid piece of paper that's crumbling as I'm trying to do a live demonstration, what you will see underneath as we reveal is this like beautiful band. And this is kind of like what cigar makers have been doing for years and years and years. And it's a wonderful branding thing. It's artistic, but then you look at that, like there's the logo, there's the Casa Turrent logo. And you can typically see them underneath. And so for the exporters, for these cigar companies that are going to want to sell in Canada, you don't have to do this in the United States. You don't have to do it anywhere else in the world. They've got to go through that extra step of putting these stupid pieces of paper on. Is this type of a thing now as you're looking at this cigar? Nice cigar, great for the golf course. But like, is this now irresistible to an 11 or 12-year-old in a way that was not when this paper was on it? Do you know what I mean? But it's an added layer. It's a cock block on the industry, and it's hurting cigar shops. They're not able to offer the depth of inventory that they had before. And I recognize it's not like the hugest issue, but I just look at when we look at like policy. And I wanted to reference a comment from Les in our live chat powered by Park Power before, who quite rightfully pointed out when I said, the feds obviously collect a ton of tax revenue from cigarettes and they're heavily taxed. These sin taxes we hear about with booze. By the way, we're working on a Real Talk Roundtable. It's going to blow your mind on wine, beer, and spirits and what tariffs are doing to them and some of the taxes that are being added on. It's going to be a good one within the next month or so. But Les said in the chat, he goes, we don't collect nearly enough revenue from cigarettes to cover the healthcare costs related to cigarettes.
100%.
And he's absolutely correct on that. I just think that when you're talking about policy, I mean, it's kind of a common thread, kind of a common theme today, whether it's supply management, we're talking milk, eggs, and poultry, or whether you're talking about harm reduction in tobacco. I think that people just want to see, especially when it's impacting the price of goods and the availability of goods for people, the government acting in a protectionist way, which to a certain degree, I guess, is the role of government. Rob was right when he was talking about things like, pornography, like you want to limit the availability of certain things in a healthily functioning society, when you're talking about minors, when you're talking about children. But I just want to see logic behind it. I want to see that it makes sense. I want to see that the government's not getting in the way of business in a way that government doesn't belong.
I'll play devil's advocate and say I think they're just trying to level the playing field, the way cigarettes have lost most of their advertising as well. And now, like, I'll go back to vapes. Yeah. They need to do that with vapes. I'm telling you right now, like, there should not be, like, colorful, technologically awesome-looking packaging and bright colors and cool flavors displayed. Like, vapes have no regulation. Like, you go to get a pack of cigarettes, it's someone's mouth with sores all over it, and
they're horrible.
Yeah, and now with cigars, I think they're just trying to level the playing field. Like, cigarettes don't have it, cigars either. But like, if you're gonna do that, you have to do it with vapes, because vapes is like it's a wonderland for kids. And somebody in the chat says, well, except kids can't buy them. Kids are gonna find ways to. Are you kidding me? Kids are gonna find ways to find.
They'll get their older
vapes.
brother to buy them or whatever,
or they'll go in with a fake
steal
ID
it from the babysitter,
or the majority of the time, shop owners are trying to make money. Do they ID that much? I don't know. I'm not gonna put blame on the shop owners. I'm just gonna say that it needs to go across the board. It needs to be cigars, cigarettes, all of them. And I get that, yeah, you lose some advertising dollars. You're going to lose some money. But in the long run, even for people who enjoy vapes and cigars and stuff like us, is it really that bad? It's saving people's lives, I think. So.
In the chat, Horse Lake Ranch says demonizing tobacco and calling pills safe supply is absolutely wild. Ytrium says the market is self-interested and has no care for larger society. Getting the market to lead is always a disaster. To a certain degree, I'll agree with you. I would say this, and I also saw that James commented on it. I said, "Let the market lead." It says, "Let the market lead" might as well be the motto of the United States and the cautionary tale that they've become. Also true. I'm not suggesting that we let big tobacco dictate the market. I think that big tobacco has proven. And has paid for it in court to a certain degree. It's interesting to see all these multi-billion-dollar class action lawsuits. I'd be curious to see where cigarette companies are at 50 50 years from now.
Yeah.
I would wager.
Not good.
I mean, they'll still be finding ways to make their money, but they'll be getting in. Like, aren't you surprised that, like, and maybe I'm wrong. Maybe
their
I'm up to
heyday
lunch,
is over.
But like,
is what I mean.
does Dumouriez, does Players, does like Export A? Do they have like they don't have vape products, right? Why are they not in that market?
They are absolutely in that game.
They are.
Who
Okay.
do you think supplies the nicotine?
Okay.
So behind the scenes, they're still making money with vapes because the nicotine has to come from a tobacco leaf, right?
And I would imagine they invest in some of these companies. They're just not using their branding. Maybe
they're just not. Their face just isn't on it. I mean, all these companies that have access or own plantations wherever you go, tobacco. I mean, they're taking some of that product and turning it into nicotine, which is placed inside vapes, right? Yeah. But as the vape companies get bigger, they'll be able to afford that as well. So will the vape companies just take over from cigarettes? I don't know. I think people will always smoke, but I definitely think like their heyday is over. I mean, you see it now, Ryan, like when you see someone light up, even on the street, when someone lights up a cigarette now, it's kind of awkward, right?
It's always a bit of a, I don't know, like pile on smokers. I understand some of you would love to quit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it is a little shocking. Like it's just a little surprising. I remember we were walking into the most recent Oilers game that we were lucky enough to attend, and there was somebody right outside the door just huffing on a cigarette, and it was kind of like you walk through the cloud of smoke, and you're kind of, and I'm not like I can handle it. But it was just like, whoa, like it just kind of, you get hit with that cigarette smoke as you're walking in. You kind of feel like, what's that person doing smoking right by the door? And then someone right next to us said, 20 years ago, bro, everybody out here would have been smoking. And it's true. Like if you think of, the way that things were. I mean, when I bartended, like back in the day, going through school at SAIT, like Johnny, it's comical now to think of smoking and non-smoking sections in restaurants. Like ridiculous. Like what? There's like a plant between the smoking and the non-smoking section, right? Wild. Can you believe that people used to smoke on airplanes? Like just imagine this day and age. I mean, obviously you'd get thrown out. Don't do it. But like imagine lighting up a dart on an airplane. Like one cigarette would pollute the whole plane, right? And then you think back in the day, these transatlantic flights, and people were smoking like a pack of cigarettes through the flight, multiple people. It's really interesting to think of how the psyche of an entire society has like completely evolved. And like we said, in one generation, I would say about 10 years. I would say about 15 years.
Sure.
There's been a major shift.
Wise Kyle in here reminding me that there is synthetic nicotine. There is, and it's becoming way more popular, but there's still real nicotine in a lot of vapes. And I would guess that if you're invested in vapes, like for sure, there's tobacco companies that are invested in vaping. It's like an oil company investing in green energy. You're looking ahead to the future, right? So if we do transition to all vaping and nicotine and real smoking goes away, I'm not sure that the players will have changed that much. It's still going to be the same money backing it, but I'll have to do a little more research here. But yeah, synthetic nicotine created synthetically is really popular.
To be honest with you, I love when stuff happens like this on shows like this, where all of a sudden, sometimes we have more questions than answers, and then we're going to go dig and we're going to learn more, and that's kind of why we all show up to do this every single day. Kenzie says they remember smoking on airplanes. Horse Lake Ranch says they were still smoking in the bar out here 10 years ago. Tracy says in 1986, took a 5-hour flight with my mom, and we sat in the smoking section of the plane. Says it was incredibly miserable. Gilles says, interesting. He says, we're talking about how health education and regulation changes behaviors for the better. Why can't we do this with carbon? Interesting point, Gilles. I'll note that many of you are also commenting on the air quality right now. Obviously with the wildfires, we're thinking of these communities in particular, remote communities, many First Nations communities that are evacuated right now, dealing with serious wildfires across the western provinces. But obviously, like you and I were even talking yesterday, this air quality, what was it? I don't have context, but it was like a 10 the other day. That's not a good thing. And the metric was like from 0 to 10. So 10 is like basically the worst air quality you can get. And I've seen some people reporting. I saw somebody on social media the other day. The guy's got a big, long goatee, like a goatee down to his sternum. He says his employer is forcing him to shave because for mask fitting, because everybody that's working outside for this company, he didn't want to name his company, but everybody that's working outside has got to wear masks now because of the air quality. They're trying to look after their staff, which you don't blame them. but pretty wild to think about. And Jill's absolutely right. When we're talking about health standards and when we're talking about, things like climate change, the impact that climate change has on wildfires, the impact that wildfires have on communities and air quality and the like, I think it's an important conversation to have. I want to jump back into our live chat. We had a ton of comments on supply management and agriculture, including some of you that are working in the space. But before we get there, our friends at Edmonton Opera are like right now in the middle of an incredible production. And I want to make sure it's on your radar because you're going to run out of time to see D. Valkyrie. But here's the deal. If you check out edmontonopera.com right now, there's also an important notice for those of you that are planning on attending this production at the McLeod Theatre at the Citadel in conjunction with Edmonton Opera. Make sure that you're getting your tickets directly from edmontonopera.com. They're seeing an increase in third-party sellers that are listing tickets. These are not official tickets, and you're not guaranteed that your purchase will be secure. In other words, you could be turned around at the door. Make sure you get your tickets from the official source. That's edmontonopera.com. This is building on Das Rheingold. So this next installment of the Ring Cycle, a bold new vision of Die Valkyrie brought to life, presented at the McLeod Theatre in collaboration with the Citadel. This is an innovative retelling that brings the audience closer than ever to drama, power, and the emotional depth of Wagner's iconic work. You've just got a short time left to check it out. Their sold-out productions have been wowing audiences over the past number of days, but keep in mind this will soon end. This is part 2 of Wagner's epic saga. You've got the 12th and the 13th of June left to check it out. That's June 12th, June 13th. Tickets at edmontonopera.com. At California Closets, a reminder that this wonderful family-owned business is Canadian-owned, and everything that they're installing, custom closets, storage solutions for your home, for your office, it's all manufactured right here in our home province of Alberta. You can make the most of your space with custom organizational systems that are guaranteed for life, and it all starts with a free design consultation. My wife Carrie and I went through this process with a California Closets designer. His name was Reese, a brilliant designer. We told him about our vision. We told him about our budget. It wasn't massive, but the magic that Reese and that team worked has been wowing us for 8 years now. We have the confidence that that investment that we made in our space will hold. It's made us more proud of where we live. It's allowed us to enjoy that space more. And of course, it adds to the resale value too. Check out a well-designed media space. Entertainment Center Solutions by California Closets. That free consultation can be booked right now at californiaclosets.ca. Hey, if you're unemployed, if you're underemployed, if you're unhappily employed, but you bring a lot to the table, you know that for a fact. Our friends at Solar by Kuby would love to talk to you at kuby.ca. That's kuby.ca. You can check out their career listings right now across Western Canada, Alberta and BC, most particularly including that electrical engineering position they're looking to fill in Calgary. They've also got team openings in Kelowna, Kamloops, Lethbridge, Edmonton, you name it. Whatever you bring to the table. Maybe you could be a certified journey person. You got your ticket. Maybe you're great at sales, office management. Maybe you're a brilliant designer. Kuby is Canada's trusted leader in solar energy, and they are scaling up their team today. Check out the careers link at kuby.ca. And a shout out to our wonderful friends at UCAN Youth Services, a nonprofit charitable organization that's helping young people out of harm's way and onto a path of economic independence. You can learn more about this organization that we are proud to support by checking out their website. That's ucan.ca, where all youth feel valued, where they can recognize their potential, embrace opportunities, and experience success. We've got some very exciting news to share on behalf of our friends at UCAN. We hope by the end of this month. So stay tuned right here on Real Talk.
Went and did some digging.
As you do. Hey, by the way, can I give you a shout out before you get into this? On top of everything else, on top of keeping our guests framed up, the audio level's perfect, the show's live stream. I'll knock on wood. The live stream's been going hummingly well. I saw that you were also fact-checking on agriculture in the live chat.
Well, I just wanted to make sure your cousin was comfortable here today.
That's great.
But
he did a good job, didn't he?
I just looked it up. So the majority of, somebody said the majority of tobacco used in vapes is synthetic. It's still the prevalence. The popular one is to get it from the plant. So tobacco, Plantations,
Interesting.
if they're owned by companies, still making the most money, but more and more synthetic, lab-derived and created nicotine is becoming more popular.
I had no
Will
idea.
eventually probably take over, because I would guess that making something in a lab instead of having to grow fields and cut down plants and dry them and all this stuff is probably cheaper.
Yeah, interesting. This is S Mountains in our live chat, powered by Park Power, says, I can remember when I was a kid, my mom and other adults were smoking in the doctor's office.
Oh, yeah.
Said it was wild times.
Okay, I was really young then, but I remember my grandma specifically, I don't want to say it because it's bad, but she drove a school bus and smoked. And she smoked in the car with like all of it. Like this was when I was like just my first memories. I remember like smoking was everywhere. Absolutely everywhere.
Yeah, JJ says they remember, where was it, driving with their aunt. And they said it was basically like my aunts were smoking like chimneys, says JJ. Think like Patty and Selma from The Simpsons. In the back of the car, no seatbelts on, headed to the lake, cigarettes blazing every 3 minutes. JJ says the 80s, man, so good.
I do. If like that question, I don't know if you've ever been asked, like, what decade would you love to live in? Like, if you could go back to any, and mine would probably be late 80s, early 90s were just like the best. 90s probably if I had to pick like a decade that didn't like cross over. But yeah, man, those were the greatest days. And there was a lot of crap we didn't know about that was harming us.
Yeah.
But there was also a lot more freedom, and there was a lot less stress. I mean, you didn't have to have an online profile.
Yeah.
You know, you had to go out and create one. And if you didn't want to, whatever, be an introvert, go play in the park. Look
Remember
at
lining
bugs
up
and trees,
lining up at the mall for hours before concert tickets went on sale?
or before like a Nintendo game came out, and now you just like click a button.
Remember
online.
the lineups when GNR Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 came out,
Oh,
and their
no.
people were lined
Explicit
up for
lyrics.
hours. Yeah, unbelievable. On the ag front, and talking about supply management, if you're just joining us on the live stream presented by California Closets, we talked to Rob Breakenridge, who has a piece in the Calgary Herald on supply management. You can read it again at calgaryherald.com. He says supply management's being ignored for sexier political battles. Interesting. Support in Ottawa, obviously, to protect supply management, but not everybody believes that Canada should. So we bring on Rob. We talked to my cousin Graham. I thought Graham offered like a really measured approach to it. He's like, you know, you're talking about, quota worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. And he's like, yeah, I mean, I think we'd be fine if they got rid of it. I'm like, wow. I mean, not every producer would. I'm sure that some would welcome it, right? If you're into more of a free market vibe, if you've already got an existing farm, you've made these investments. He talked about the price of combines. We had a little social gathering in here after an Oilers game a few nights ago.
Yeah.
There was a guy that reps a John Deere dealership. He was in from Saskatchewan. I said to him, I was like, combines now? They're worth like they're like $1 million, aren't they? He goes, oh, buddy, some of them are way more than $1 million. He's like, sprayers are $1 million. Like farm equipment is the cost of operating a farm. You wouldn't believe it. And I do see some people in the chat here that are saying like these farmers, quota, they're being protected by Ottawa. It says they're all rich and everybody else is having to pay more at the grocery store. I will say this, while some farms, including I'm sure the Jespersen farm, which I have no stake in, although I am thinking of maybe taking Graham to court to get my fair share, maybe like 5% or something, he could pay me out. We'll see how it goes. I'll keep you all posted on that. But that family farm, like Graham said, the land's worth a lot. The quota might be worth a lot. But you talk to any farmer, there's people in other industries that are the same. That's not cash in hand, right? The farm may be worth a lot, but the only way that you're cashing in on it is by selling the farm, right? So I don't know if they're rich, but obviously the property's worth a lot. Curtis says, finally, it seems, and grateful to Real Talk, I guess, says we can finally talk about the milk ripoff in this country. Ben says, so the topic of this morning, the Canadian milk cartel. PNC Bio says Ontario, Quebec are the two provinces that are being absolutely destroyed by tariffs. 50% on steel and aluminum is wild. Says, I'm dying to know what Alberta has to say about supply management. Says, when I ask about it, my prairie farming, the family, about getting rid of how the wheat board worked out, they don't seem too keen. Says they also managed to blame the Liberals for that. I saw that John, who's watching us live on Facebook today, what's up, John, says, the big problem is that all these different boards, right, the wheat, beef, dairy, they're just protection rackets for their own agendas. Says we need more cash crops that are not controlled so much. John says, because farmers and ranchers truly need the influx of money. That from John, who's watching us live on Facebook. Melissa says, keep supply management. We don't want to be like the States and be dumping tons of milk. And Melissa's absolutely right on that. That does happen. Dwayne says, without farmers and ranchers, we'll have a diminished food supply. Farmers and ranchers have a big enough risk as it is. Why make it worse for them? Others say, what about the consumer that buys the product to subsidize the industry? Or is it better to move to like an American style? Basically, all taxpayers pay for every subsidy. Accurate. Whiteream says we need to expand supply management into the beef industry. I don't think ranchers want that, quite frankly. It's always been interesting to me. You can talk to two people, and I'll describe them as, they're farmers or they're ranchers, but they're entrepreneurs. It's the same as doctors, quite frankly, family doctors. They're entrepreneurs, they're business people. But I have yet to speak to anybody in beef that would welcome supply management. Maybe I'm wrong. If you work in beef and you'd welcome supply management, I'd love to hear from you. Talk at ryanjespersen.com. Hell, we'd love to bring you on the show. But I've always found it interesting. You talk to two people that work with cattle, right? One may be dairy, one may be beef, and they'll have very different perspectives on supply management. But Whiteream goes on to say, expanded into the beef industry. Beef's been losing family farms since the 1950s. Supply management would make it economical for people to stay on farms. That's an interesting point. Others, Erica says, admittedly, I don't know a lot about supply management, but what I do know is that ultimately a completely free market will balance itself between supply, demand, and prices, which is fair. Dwayne, by the way, recommending a John Mellencamp song, Rain on the Scarecrows, says that that's a great insight into what farmers deal with. Curtis says, due to government intervention, milk quota rights are worth millions. These farmers are super rich, and prices in the grocery store are way higher. Others of you are talking about the quality, by the way, of American dairy products, in the context of Canadian quality being superior. Alberta Girl says supply management is one of the only policies that protects our domestic food supply. The first term, Donald Trump bankrupted thousands of American dairy farmers, and they have high prices now because of low supply. Denny says if we step away from complying with requests from the Americans to apply tariffs on Chinese EVs, then maybe we won't see reciprocal tariffs. It was interesting to see, to hear from Graham on the grain front, saying that these tariffs on grain are having a way bigger impact on his farm and on his bottom line than anything else. We've also got a point, by the way, I talked about Calgary's airport welcoming Air Force One. 80s Fanify says they're not sure if Air Force One is actually going to be landing in Alberta. Said that they were reading that the president may be helicoptering in from Montana. Which could be interesting, an interesting way to roll into Kananaskis. Makes sense, bypass the airport, chopper in. But 80s Fanify goes on to say, I guess I don't have to flip off every plane from my backyard. So they're going to be saving some time there, which is good. Alberta Ganger says, I don't like the production quota of supply management. I am perfectly okay with the protected market. Jillian says the myth that Donald Trump can produce deals. It's crazy how people are just accepting what rich white men say they are. She goes on to say, as long as the American meat, egg, and dairy industry is low-quality shit, you won't convince me to hate our supply management system. That's from Jillian.
Of the deal.
The art of the deal.
I still don't see the artistry in it, but okay.
Dubious says if farmers didn't just vote conservative every damn time, I wouldn't have a problem with them. But they vote against their interests and then they cry about it. That from Dubious.
Yeah, I didn't like some of the flack coming in on the chat today.
Were people hard on farmers?
Farmers get too many handouts. Well, like I know farmers have net worth because they own land and equipment and stuff like that. But we know farming is like low margin. Like they don't have disposable income sitting around buckets of cash.
I mean, some of them do all right, and that's great.
Of course. But the majority of farmers in North America are not rich. Maybe they're land rich, maybe they're net worth, okay? But like they're not raking in cash. And those handouts are designed to make it easier for them to get food to us. So I don't know. Most of the time I'm on the farmer's side to where we need to help them. We need to give them more. We need to give them a leg up. Because, I mean, what do you want to do? Take away handouts, take away policy that helps farmers, and then what happens? Food gets more scarce, expensive. It's how we live.
100% right.
What are we talking about?
What are we trying to? We're trying to chase people away from feeding us?
No, we want more people to become farmers, and it's becoming less and less desirable to want to be doing all this. I mean, your cousin, for example, he doesn't. I mean, he doesn't look like the least stressed guy I know, if you know what I mean.
Graham is he is such a beauty, and his two brothers. They're just an amazing family, and they work in frontline emergency response. You've got a very well respected firefighter, you got a very well respected police officer, and then you got the dairy farmer, and it's just an awesome family.
I'm just saying, like for any farmer, it's high risk. Crazy
man.
Stuff can happen.
They get these hailstorms.
Somebody just said in the chat. They just said hailstorm.
Yeah.
Like something happens and there goes all your money for that month or 2 or 3 months.
And it's fascinating to talk to some of them. And again, I don't want to get too far out of my depth here. If I start talking about farming, those of you that do farm are going to be like, listen, City Slicker, keep your observations to the downtown core.
But everyone eats food,
we
can have an opinion.
I do know, because farmers have told me, like, you guys be in touch with the show. Let us know how this applies to your own operation. But sometimes, or maybe in many instances, you may say, well, the hailstorm totally took out that crop, or big windstorms, or drought, or whatever it is. There's a million things that can happen. But they'll say, well, they're insured. But insurance can be prohibitively expensive. So in a lot of circumstances, farmers and producers are choosing which crops they're going to insure and which ones they're not. Yeah. And if something happens, then okay, you can collect on the insurance, but it's like you're getting rich on the insurance. But in many circumstances, an uninsured crop will be wiped out by whatever. And you're talking a loss of, it could be a few $100,000. It could be a couple of $1 million, like depending on the size of it and depending on the extent of the damage. So I just think there's a huge risk to it. It's a thankless profession.
Hugely
I really mean it. I really appreciate when we say thank a farmer, like we mean it. Yeah. JJ says, why are we not pulling together unbiased, nonpartisan provincial committees to investigate and report on a way forward that's not tied to other landowners or government? Just like, here are the facts. Yeah, probably easier said than done, because who puts that together? Government agencies, right? I don't know. I see Curtis throwing shade, says if farmers are so busy, why could they sit at the Coots border for weeks? I mean, Jesus. Okay. I don't think every farmer in the prairies was there in Coots, but I'll take your point that some people seem to have more time to occupy Ottawa as opposed to working. Some of you are also sharing insights just on the industry, talking about how, where the money is and where it's not. Talking about like grain farming, for example, could be way more lucrative than beef. Horse Lake Ranch says we can't consume all the beef we produce. Dairy we do. And you're right. I mean, obviously beef is a huge export and a huge opportunity. That's great. We should be proud of our beef exports. Cam says farming is generally a lot of money in and a lot of money out, and high cost of inputs is driving farming profits down. And Cam throws a bullseye with that one. And he says, and you are subject to weather for success. Jill says, I'm okay with subsidizing farm, oil, dairy. Says, I'm not okay with anybody in those industries complaining about subsidies that others get as though they're doing it all on their own. And I think that that's a great point as well. Let us know what you think about this. And a lot of people are Alberta Girl, let's leave on this. Says, walk a mile in a farmer's boots and see how well you'll eat. Everybody thinks it's easy to do a business plan and just go for it. Curtis going on to say, by the way, says farmers work 24/7, 24 days a year, 7 days, 7 hours a day. Nice one. Well played, Curtis. We do love to hear from you. When we say we invite your feedback, we really do mean it, whether that's leaving a comment on our YouTube episode, whether that's hitting us up on any of our social media platforms at Real Talk RJ, or, of course, an email to talk@ryanjespersen.com. Maybe it's a submission for the flamethrower, which will be coming up on our next episode of the show. That'll be the 13th, Johnny, the Friday the 13th episode of Real Talk, presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. If you want to blow off a little steam, you know what to do, Real Talkers. And as we wrap, we're not looking to be patted on the back. What are we even doing? No Oilers talk today. We're going to shake it up. We're shaking up.
Don't mention
the vibe. And if they win big, we'll talk about it. If they don't, we'll see what happens.
Go Oilers.
Go Oilers, go. Thanks for being a fan of Real Talk. Thanks for being a friend. We'll talk to you again soon.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jespersen, executive producer Josh Dunford, technical producer John Hicks, general manager Katie Cook-Chivers, account coordinator Lawrence Derlego, human resources Lena Shepard, website design Mike Johnston, voiceover by me, Carrie Skelton. Real Talk's editorial board is Supriya Dwivedi, Ahmed Ali, Brandy Morin, Ann Castleman, Corey Hogan, Harman Candola, Catherine O'Neill, and Chris Henderson. Member Emerita, Julie Rohr. Real Talk is recorded in Edmonton, Alberta on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, home to the Métis settlements and the Métis Nation of Alberta. Real Talk is a relay project. For more, check out ryanjespersen.com.